Hi, this is the Global City Mission podcast, and I'm Jared Looney, Executive Director of Global City Mission.
And I'm Joey Durmire. I'm the Director of Mobilization for Global City Mission.
Awesome. And we are also joined today by a Global City Mission Catalyst in Philadelphia, Gabriel Brazle. Hey, Gabe.
Hey, guys. What's up?
And also another Mission Catalyst from GCMI in Phoenix, Dave Smith.
Great to be with you.
Great, guys. Hey, it's so fun to be together. And this group has been together in other contexts, but I don't think we've ever done a podcast episode all together before. So this will be a fun conversation. So what we want to do today is take a few minutes together to reflect on one of the parables of Jesus. And it's a little bit of a scary one, but I think it's also a hopeful one too, in a lot of ways. And really connect that story that Jesus tells with some of our everyday experience, some of the practical experiences represented in this conversation. So those unfamiliar with Matthew 25, especially looking at chapter 25, 31 to 46, Jesus tells a story, and it's about judgment, right? It's one of those. So it's kind of a heavy parable, right? And he really talks about judgment based on how we have treated people that are vulnerable and marginalized or neglected, how we treat them, or perhaps how we've neglected others. And Jesus really says that to those that receive the favorable judgment, he says, when you have done these good things for these people and you've helped these people, what he calls the least of these, right? He says, you've done it for me. It's like serving Jesus himself. And Jesus identifies things like, helping the sick and like visiting those in prison and giving food to the hungry and water to the thirsty. And then he also talks about welcoming the stranger. That when we welcome the stranger, it's like welcoming Jesus. And the word there in the original language for stranger in this passage is xenos. In English, it's kind of like the word outlander, right? And it commonly refers to someone who is a foreigner. And that was the general understanding of the term. It's welcoming a foreigner. And so in Matthew 25, Jesus is saying, when you welcome a foreigner, it's like you're welcoming Jesus himself. And along with that idea in the New Testament, it's really tied to this practice of hospitality. Some translations say that you when you met the foreigner, you invited him in. It's this idea of hospitality. And man, I tell you what, hospitality is a big deal in the Bible. If you really study hospitality and what's going on, culturally and in the Old and New Testament, you could easily argue that hospitality is a Christian virtue, right up there with telling the truth and humility and things like that it's really, really important in the context of the Bible. And, we were really excited to talk to Gabriel and to Dave, because you guys have both made a regular practice of sharing hospitality with foreigners of various backgrounds, people that have come to your city, whether international students or migrated there for various reasons, or refugees, just all kinds of people from all kinds of backgrounds. That you guys have made made it a regular practice of welcoming the stranger. And I think a lot of Christians in the United States have actually not had this experience. Some have, but many haven't. And so one of the things I'd love to hear from you guys is, how is this practice of hospitality, welcoming the foreigner, into your home, at your table, how has that been a blessing to you or to your family?
Gabe, why don't you start?
Yeah, I can start. All right. Sorry about that. There was like a lot of noise right out my window. So it's such a blessing. Like, my family is eternally changed because of the people that we have had through the doors of our home. I have 3 kids, and I love it because, like, the perspective and understanding they have of the world is just so much different and dare I say bigger than I had when I was younger, seeing themselves as a part of something that is much bigger than even their city. And so it's a blessing for me as their father to be able to have them also raised in this environment. For myself personally, I'm better at conversation. I'm much better at listening. I'm better at empathy. I'm better at general banter. Many Americans, whenever we hang out with other Americans, we're like, let's watch sports. Let's do this thing. And then we can kind of turn and talk to one another occasionally. A lot of my friends from around the world, they would like to come and sit and pull up a chair across from me and talk for 1 or 2 or 3 hours about everything. And so I've become a better conversationalist. My family has a better and deeper understanding of the world and the cultures around us. We've been blessed to see and be a part of love and action. The food, like we're making food and giving food to people, but it's a rare time that I'll have people into my house and they won't bring something to me to share with me. And so that's amazing. But I was saving this one till last. I think that a couple of the biggest things to me that are a blessing whenever I think about welcoming the foreigner, one would just be, in all truth and all reality, some of the deepest relationships that I have come because I chose to open my heart to others in this way. And second, I think the biggest thing is just seeing how much bigger God is than I previously ever imagined, because he is the God of that culture. He is the God of that place. He is, whenever they're not believers, I get to see how, he has created them and all those pieces of them. But then even whenever I host a person that might be a believer or becomes a believer, I get to see the way in which they see God. And that's amazing. That's amazing.
Wow. That's great, man. Dave, what about you?
Yes, it's been amazing. Particularly here, I work with international students. We've had refugees in the past. I think getting to know people from around the world and picking up on Gabe's point, seeing the creativity of God, the diversity of God. As you made, hospitality is a big deal in the Bible, and it's a big deal around the world. And over 75% of international students who come to America will never enter an American home. So when we have people in our home, it's a really big deal to them. And I see that. They take pictures of the food. They take pictures of our pictures. They take pictures of the Christmas tree. They helped us put up the Christmas tree and decorate it. And I had a young woman from Taiwan said, I was dreaming hoping I'd be able to do this in America. Thank you so much for making that possible. And most of the people we have in our home are not believers. But to your point about opening with Matthew 25, whenever we're having people over and I'm sitting at the table that we sit around, I just feel like I'm right in the middle of where I should be, that this is honoring God, that he's pleased that we're doing this. And I can't help but think about Paul in Acts 17, 26, 27, that this is a supernatural moment because people are not here by accident, that God has appointed times in history and boundaries of land and put people where he wants them that they may somehow reach out and find him. So I realize, and I tell the students, you're not here by accident. You may think you came just for your engineering degree, but God has other things in mind. So it's such a delight. In the past, when we've had more refugees over than we have now, like I said, I'm mainly students. It was your own problems start to get a lot more minimal, and you realize it made Nancy and I, even though she's in a wheelchair for over 20 years, more grateful people. When we have Congolese refugees in our home and they talk about some of their experiences, it's like, what are we complaining about ever? And you realize, and you see in this case, the Congolese refugees were primarily believers. You see their faith, their perseverance. It's amazing. My kids are out of the house, but honestly, I have felt like a dad to many of these international students. Many of them have, an Iranian student last week, he has been unable to make the Bible study recently. He's a PhD, got a lot of work. He said, can I come early and can we just talk? I said, of course. But he tells me on more than one occasion, I look at you like my dad, and I treat you like my dad. So, getting old is not everything is cracked out to be, but it does have its advantages.
Yeah, I haven't got that from any of my friends.
Exactly. Now that I'm pushing 66, I can, for a lot of them, they are lonely, and they come and because they're so close relationally, and to your point, Gabe, they're not watching TV. They're always talking. And I talk to my Indian friends. What do you guys, we just talk for 3 or 4 hours, and they'll call home sometimes 3-4 times a day. I said, what on earth do you talk about? But they find stuff. They just talk. And so they miss that. And so when they come into our home, it feels a little bit like home for them, even though obviously I'm not their family. So, the blessings are personal because it's fun. I love hearing it. I love sharing the love of Jesus with them. But I really feel like I'm in the middle of where God would have me be. That when we're doing hospitality, I think it is close to the heart of Jesus. And and especially if you take that whole idea of welcoming the stranger, that we were all, until we came to know Jesus, we're all on the outside. So we should have such a heart for those on the outside, whether it's geographic, ethnically, spiritually. That should be our heartbeat, because that's God's heartbeat.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, you're talking about the food. It just made me laugh a little bit thinking about it, because I had a Chinese PhD student at my table a few years back for Thanksgiving. And afterwards, he wanted me to text him a picture of the box of the stuffing, because he had never had that before. And then I see him a couple weeks later, and he tells me he went and found the stovetop stuffing because he thought it was amazing.
That's awesome.
So, well, you guys have both also, I know both of you guys have hosted people at your table, sharing meals together, and sitting together for holidays, sitting together for an evening meal, drinking coffee, and having those long conversations with people that maybe come from countries who maybe our country doesn't get along with very well. And so, and you've opened your home in that way and shared, conversations about Jesus. What have these experiences and these relationships taught you guys about discipleship?
Well, I'll jump in. It is so relational. In America, we're so programmatic. And I mean, my background. I had a lot of years in pastoral ministry, a lot of years running programs. And I said to somebody the other day, what I've absolutely loved about this is I'm learning how to be better at discipleship. To Gabe's point, learning how to really build into relationships. So I'd say that it's relational, that it's organic, that it happens in moments where you wouldn't necessarily think it would happen. A lot of these folks are in Bible studies with me, and that's fantastic. But a lot of discipleship is, how am I treating my wife who's a quadriplegic? And how am I treating her when I feed her? I mean, they're watching these things and they're looking at her. How is she? Is she down in the dumps? Is she mad at God all the time? So not to put the fishbowl perfection, but they're looking for real life stuff. And it's been a chance just to realize a lot of discipleship is, again, looking at the life of Jesus. And I would say one of the challenges in America is we are not around people all the time like he was. But when you have these extended times together in the home, it's just very natural. And I notice that when we have these times, this isn't the goal, that when we go back for Bible study, for example, or when you start talking about spiritual things, whether it's here or somewhere else, there's a depth that wasn't there before. What I've also discovered is that when I have people in my home and I ask them if they want to learn about Jesus, and I say, look, I want you to, but you need to know I'm going to be your friend no matter what. That if they don't want to, they'll say no, and we're still friends. And then maybe a year later, they'll say yes. And it might be 2 years later. So it shows people, I think, they're not projects. They really are people. And so what I've learned is people don't want to be projects. People want to be people. They want to be people who are loved and get to love. And so, it's taught me so much. I can't even put all of it into words, but it's been a whole revolutionary experience. And I'll say one more thing, especially after my stroke, that a lot of discipleship really is, as Paul's, it's our weakness. It's God working through our weakness. And, to Gabe's point, when I had one of my first surgery after I fell the second time, and had an Iranian couple, both of them doing PhDs, busy all the time. I'm talking about 8 a.m, 10 p.m. Took 5 hours to make a special dish to bring to me because of the relationships that we had made. They took an Uber to do it, stayed here for a little while, a couple hours, and then went back home. So it's, in America, I've thought so much program, but it's so much more relational. It's organic. It's natural.
Wow. Gabe, what do you think? What is these relationships and hospitality with folks that maybe, maybe the world says we're supposed to be at enmity with? Like, what has that taught you about discipleship?
I think that, to Dave's point, I think that the fact that discipleship is relational, I think is just the first thing about discipleship in that regard. But whenever you're talking about people that you're supposed to be clashing with, we see that Jesus spent a lot of time with people from backgrounds who didn't necessarily like his country or the country that they were sitting around with the Romans, etc. Right? So he hung out with Samaritans, hung out with Jews, hung out sometimes with Romans, and then he also hung out with a lot of people that didn't have a good view of like the Jewish faith. Maybe they didn't think that they were, they thought they were below it. They were the outcasts. They were the gutter people. They weren't the people who were righteous and holy and so I think that whenever we get to show up in these spheres of hospitality and hosting, and we're with people, we're showing up in a way that maybe Jesus would have. And these experiences teach us about being like Jesus and showing up in love. I think that one thing you really learn whenever you're with people that are pretty different from you is you realize that discipleship does require some humility and some ability to slow down to learn. And it's exciting because discipleship involves serving and not just speaking and teaching. And here you have the opportunity that's just naturally sitting here just to serve and to love. But back to that note about humility, I've never once had someone in my house and they've tried to shame my country or my faith or my people are very respectful and kind and edifying and to me and to my family. And I think that even there you have all these preconceived notions like, oh, this person's from this country that's full of, as maybe the media would have me believe, like only terrorists or something like that. But then you come into my house and you get up and, your wife's doing my dishes and you're on the ground playing with my kids and wait a second, I'm learning something right now that a part of being a believer of Jesus, is also withholding a lot of judgment. And I think that that's pretty important too. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Yes, I kind of got going and zeroed off on that enemy quote, considered enemy part. A lot of the folks that come into our home are from China and Iran, and it's just God's love just conquers it. And you learn that people are not their governments either, right? I mean, people are people. They're not their governments. And so when I hear stories of people on the bus every now and then yelling at one of my Chinese friends, and he tells me this, or someone's rude to him in a cafeteria line, and we talk about it. It's like, what? Sometimes people just don't get it. But they're not their governments. They're people made in God's image for whom Jesus died, and people that we need to love, and people that have same needs and wants as we do as human beings.
Yeah.
So you learn that people may have different cultures and backgrounds, but at the core, we all need the love of God. We all need to be loved by other people. So
Yeah.
So all of us on this call here, we all we've all had the experience of sharing gospel conversations with someone from a different background than ourselves. And thinking about that practice of hospitality, connected with welcoming the stranger. What do you think? I mean, does hospitality have anything to do with evangelism, or are those just two completely separate things?
Hosting is showing the love of Jesus. It is evangelism, but it's not evangelism in its entirety. Paul writes in Romans, how then can they call on the one that they have not believed in if they've not heard? And I'm going to paraphrase, but how can they hear if no one tells them? And like I said, when I'm hosting, we're having conversation. And this opportunity to be able to sit and have conversation, that's an opportunity to be able to be present with people, to love them, to feed them, to care for them. And through all of those things and through our words, proclaiming the gospel, because until you have a relationship, like not that many people are going to listen to you. At least I know I will.
Yeah. Yeah.
No, that's well said. I didn't think about that just this moment. Years ago, there was a guy named Paul Little, and he used to travel around and talk on college campuses to people who did not know Jesus. But he was asked one time, what's more important, the words you say as in the gospel or the life that you live? And he said, that's like asking what's more important, the right or left wing of an airplane. I mean, you got to have both. And I found that to be true. And not only you have these relationships, but as we identify early on, hey, we're followers of Jesus. So are you? I'd like to pray for you. I'd like to thank God for the food. I'd like to thank God for you. And so it gives you a chance to naturally begin to live out your faith without a presentation or whatever. It just becomes part of who you are and what they expect of you, rather than having it so compartmentalized with a presentation or a Bible study or something like this. And so, and to Gabe's great point, I mean, we're telling people about the love of God. We should be living it out and showing this is what it looks like. I'm going to be your friend. I'm going to help you when I can. I'm going to pray for you. I'm going to ask you how you're doing. I'm going to text you and tell you I'm praying for you. And I'm going to want you to get a hold of me if you need something. And so hospitality just enhances all of that because it just deepens those relationships.
Yeah. So one of the things I wanted to touch on as you guys were talking is, we've talked a lot about hospitality and this idea of welcoming people into your home. Can you guys talk a little bit about having a hospitable spirit, right? So are you just a welcoming person? So obviously, yes, you invite people into your home, but I find that a lot of us as Americans, we just sort of live closed off, and we live very much, I've got my routine, I'm going here, I'm doing this, I have no time for anybody else. But I think when I look at Jesus, I see someone who slowed down, who is hospitable in spirit, who gave people moments and time more than hey, look, I'm busy, I got somewhere to go. Like, can you guys speak into that a little bit?
That's good.
Very good.
So 3 days ago, I was running to the train and I had a thing of ramen noodles. It was going to be my lunch later on. And this guy comes up to me and he's like, hey, can I have $1? And I didn't have $1. Another guy comes up to me and he's like, hey, can I have $1? Actually, I don't even need $1, man. I just need some food. And I'm like trying not to spend any money. And I hand him my ramen noodles. Immediately, I'm like, yep, here you go. And I turn around, I continue walking, and I'm like, oh, and I throw like a little fit. My heart was not in a loving place. It was that practice of hospitality and serving and like is drilled into me. And I think that's a good thing. But I had to take a moment with God like later on that next day, because where does that spirit of hospitality come? That's God's spirit. That comes from the fruits of the spirit. And so,
right.
Yes, I would say absolutely. I oftentimes am able to live in that place because every morning I'm asking God, like, Lord, let me have your eyes to see. Let me slow down for the things that you would slow down for and be present where it's important. Because as Dave was saying earlier, or Jared was saying, like, I mean, we live very differently than so much of the world. We come home and we do this thing and we're busy here and we're busy there. I don't talk to my mom for 4 hours a day. That's crazy. But at the same time, I desire to have that hospitable spirit. And more days than not, I do. And that's because of the Lord. And that's something that I'm constantly seeking out. Yeah. That's me. I don't know if I just hope that example was like, I know what you're talking about.
I know I relate to your story sometimes. And not to say I always act in obedience, but sometimes when I act in obedience, my heart still has to catch up.
Yeah.
And I still didn't talk with the guy really. Like, I mean, like, if that's still, if I see him again, man, like, dude.
No, that is such a great point. And we do something on Saturday mornings called English Corner, where we help people practice English. And one of the most compliments we get the most from internationals is, I feel so welcomed here. Everybody has such a welcoming spirit. And we get older and younger, and that is rare. And interestingly enough, I hear from, who was I talking to? I can't remember which culture it was, which country, but even though a lot of people have more hospitality around the world, they say we don't talk and welcome people like you do here in America, which I found very interesting. But yes, hospitality is so much more than just having people into home. And, God has such a great sense of humor. We know, I think one day I was sitting down, it was a hot summer day in the building where I was inside meeting with a student. He was from Taiwan. And I think we were talking about some of this kind of Jesus welcomes people and all. And there's a knock on the door, and a guy who was homeless, who had been jumped literally, and kind of almost said, like, sarcastically, is it possible, because he'd been turned down, just to get a drink of water here? I thought there's so much biblical in this, literally a cup of water. So there was cold water. I went and gave him some water, which moved him. And then you could tell he was bleeding all over. He told me a story. He'd been jumped. And I normally don't give money for a variety of reasons. Just, I don't always know the deal. But I looked at him, I said, do you have any money? He says, no, he took everything. And I pulled out a bill, and the guy just broke down and wept. And what was so amazing was his immediate response was, how can I help this place now? He wanted to give back. How can I volunteer here? So hospitality has such power in so many ways. It was just such a little thing. And it was ironic that all this was playing out in front of this young man from Taiwan to whom I was trying to communicate what Jesus was all about. And I thought, God has such a great sense of humor. The timing was impeccable. So.
Dave, did you debrief with the guy with you at all?
Yeah. I said, Jeff, I said, what happened here? I said, this was almost more than symbolic. To give a cold water in Jesus' name. I said, literally, that's because it was cold water. It was hot summer day. It was cold water. And as I was handing it to him, I said, this can't possibly be happening. He said, God's so funny. And we did talk about it. I said, this is what God wants us to do. He wants us to show his love in this way, even to someone that we don't know, and obviously has had a rough time. So
yeah. Well, just thinking about that passage in Matthew 25, right? I mean, you're in the middle of welcoming the stranger when all of a sudden now you get a chance to give a cup of water
to another stranger, even though even though it's certainly the least of these. And like I said, absolutely. The guy was legit. You could tell he had been beat up. And so anyway, I chuckled. I thought, what kind of testimony would have been? No, I'm doing a Bible study. Get out of here.
I know. Yes. Well, there is that story of the Good Samaritan and the people that passed him by, people.
So many years when Nancy and I would drive, we would drive to church, we would laugh like, get out of my way. I'm late for church. You're honking the horn. Kind of the whole anti what we're supposed to be.
No, absolutely. Absolutely. Well, hey guys, if someone is listening to this and they say, hey, I realize I've been missing out. I mean, not everyone has experienced this, especially kind of what we've talked about in our culture. We don't always do this, right? Welcoming the outsider, and inviting the foreigner in. And so if someone is listening to this and they say, man, I've been missing out. I want to do this. I want to step into this aspect of the gospel. But maybe they're a little nervous. It might be the cross-cultural part of it, just the unknowns. Maybe it's hospitality, the active hospitality, or maybe it's just trying to learn that hospitable spirit that apparently we're all trying to learn too, in other words, they just really don't know where to start. What are the first steps? I mean, what would you suggest to someone as first steps to actually begin living out the practice and the attitude, the spirit of welcoming the stranger? What do you guys think?
Well, I know what I hear one way. In fact, we did this way years ago when I was in my 20s, is to contact a local, who I work with, international students. You could contact the local college as international students. I know a way a lot of people get involved initially is a lot of colleges want internationals to experience an authentic American Thanksgiving, for example. So, and there's clubs. You can ask around for clubs that would even start this kind of thing. You don't have to wait till Thanksgiving, but if people are afraid to just kind of jump in, that maybe that's something that might feel more natural, is have someone in your home for Thanksgiving. But I think if they reached out to the international students department and say, look, I would like to have an international over, what might that look like? They might get some information. I think also there's refugee groups, ministries. Like I just contacted one. My schedule changed, so I can't do the Tuesday night online helping with English. But they're looking for people to just serve and welcome refugees beyond helping them with English. So, Gabe, you've been doing this for a while in Philly. What are some of your thoughts?
No, I was gonna say a lot of the same things. I think like for that first like dipping your toes kind of in the water, it's really nice whenever you do have some of the groups that already are established. And so, I mean, what you said there, and then you also said, Thanksgiving. Honestly, like any holiday that we eat food, it's a really natural, like, 4th of July cookout, Thanksgiving, even like, I mean, Memorial Day and Labor Day, like, hey, we do a cookout, and there's people are like, oh, it's a lot less. It's still super intimate, but not near as like intimate as like, next Tuesday night at 7. Like it just kind of, and then, I mean, for the brave souls that are like, man, I actually already maybe know an international guy. Like whenever I go into, the I don't know, my doctor or the guy who works at my gas station or this person, like the worst thing that's going to happen if you say, hey, I've been thinking like you've been in America for a long time. Like, have you ever been in an American's home? Is they're going to say, no, and I don't want to. Like, that's awkward, but that's going to be the worst thing that happens. Like, and I don't think that will happen. And so I think that just having, as you continue to pray for and ask the Lord for that hospitable heart, I can't say that, then I think that he'll also help you set up ways and inroads to be able to do that.
Yeah.
Yeah, and one other thought when you said that, when you talked about it doesn't have to be Thanksgiving, just cookouts, whatever. A lot of times I don't move immediately into that just because of schedule. It's more like being hospitable. Can I buy you a cup of coffee? Or can I buy you lunch? And so you begin to build that relationship. And to Joey's point, you're exercising the hospitable spirit. And then I might say something like, hey, I would really like to have you into my home. I'd love for you to meet my wife. And it's not like it's not like this huge step from I barely met you to into my home, especially if they might be a little skeptical. You have them for coffee, you spend an hour, you start to build that relationship, and then you say, can I have you into my home, basically.
Yeah,
so
it doesn't have to start with come right to dinner, right? I mean, it could be that cup of coffee. Kind of warm up a little bit, build the relationship. Well, one thing about food and the holidays and all those things, I think for people to keep in mind too is depending on who you're inviting and what their background is, there could be some different dietary restrictions that could even be religious dietary restrictions. So just to be aware of those things, maybe ask the questions. People that come from somewhere else, they know they're not from here, and they know that you may not know. So just asking the questions. Totally. Joey, like Dave, you've been a pastor a long time as well as working in kind of the mission lane here with us. What would you say to kind of help people? You think about people in your church that may kind of want to lean into this. Like, what are some of the ways some of the guidance you would offer?
Yeah, I mean, I think similar to what's already been said, especially what Dave just touched on, like, hey, can we get coffee? Can I grab you lunch? Especially if it's someone like, maybe it's someone you work with, in our spheres where we are, some of our people, they work in corporate environments where they have international people who work alongside them. So, and so for some of them, it may be just a matter of like, I probably should start having conversations with this guy in the cubicle next to me. I mean, or this group, and kind of go talk to them. And hey, you mind if I get you some coffee, or we hang out in the break room and just ask questions and just start conversations like that. So those first little steps, when you hear into your home, that can be very scary because it's a big jump for a lot of people. And so those little acts of like, hey, can I buy you coffee? Can we sit at the lunch, have lunch together? You're going to eat lunch. I'm going to eat lunch. Can we sit together at the break room and just talk, I I think little steps that we can take, of course, always in prayer. Jesus, show me who I can talk to, give me the courage to ask, open the heart to be receptive to maybe wanting to have it. So I think those are some ways. One of the things I not to keep going a little bit longer, but I do think one of the other things to be mindful of, Gabe touched on this for a second, is when you do have those people in your home, oftentimes they will bring stuff with them, and it may be something from their culture, something from their country, and embrace it. Embrace it. Take it. Because they feel like, that's their gift to you, and so, receive it lovingly, receive it with grace, and receive it with the care that it came with, and appreciate it, and take it. I think that's another big piece. I think we also have to work on receiving hospitality back.
Yes.
Because I think that's also a form of love, right? When we receive that hospitality back from them. And so, especially when we're talking cross-culturally, other cultures will come in, it's part of their thing. They'll bring it. And so, yeah.
And that's what you see also in scripture, right? I mean, what you just mentioned, Joey, that like when Jesus sends out the disciples in Luke chapter 10, and they're to go basically find an hospitable person that is going to take them in so that they can, share the message. But it starts with finding that person who receives them. And even, the vision that Peter gets before going to Cornelius's house. I mean, there's all kinds of symbolism there, but there is just the basic reality of it's not a kosher home. He's not supposed to go in. And he's certainly not supposed to sit at that table and eat, and yet he breaks through that barrier, led by the Spirit to do so. So like, how do we even not only, have a hospitable spirit, as you asked earlier, how do we practice hospitality? How do we warm up to it with that cup of coffee? But then also, how do we also, receive it ourselves? Those are all great things to kind of really lean into. And I think it teaches us a lot about our own discipleship, our own just following, active following Jesus. So guys, this has been rich. I've really been blessed by this. And this has been the Global City Mission Podcast. And we want to remember that every time we have an opportunity to welcome the stranger, it is as if we are welcoming Jesus himself.
Amen.